Bob Searing. Cheers. Thanks
Cheers.
for coming in.
Hey, thanks for having me. I love it.
Happy Thursday.
This is great.
So, all right. Tell everybody what you do besides
My friend, that's a loaded question.
being a man about town.
Well, yeah, I'm a man about town. I mean, what I do is, I'm a historian by trade. That's what brought me to Syracuse. I came here in 2006 to go to the Maxwell School to work on my PhD in American history. Never imagined that I would still be here. What is it now, 17 years later? Fell into sort of a happy accident. Became curator of the Onondaga Historical Association down there on Montgomery Street, really as a result of a good friend of mine and a colleague at the Maxwell School, Dr. Tom Geiler, who's now out at the Oneida Mansion House, sent me an email. I was adjuncting, and my wife and I had our 2 kids, and I'm hanging out trying to figure out what's next. And he sent me an email. He was down at Winterthur, and he's like, "Look, the OHA is looking for a curator. Check it out." I'm like, "Well, I'm not a museum guy. I'm a historian. I want to be a professor." And anyway, I sent an application in, and as it turns out, I hit it off well with Greg Tripoli, who's the now retired executive director of the OHA, and really, I think, helped resurrect the organization. And he and I hit it off. And actually, one of the things that really drew me to the role was during the job interview. He's like, "I've got this idea. I didn't know anything about the brewing history of Syracuse. I didn't know anything about Syracuse. I was a noob. I was a transplant." And Greg's like talking to me about Congress beer. So here we are having this beer.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Look, man, I love history. I love beer. I know some of the guys I had just met, Rock and Kev, through friends of mine at the Carrier Dome, JMA Wireless Dome, excuse me." And so we start hitting off, and he hired me sort of on a flyer, and that's like 6.5 years ago.
That's wild.
And in the meantime, we've built 2 museums, one out at Hancock International, the Regional Aviation History Museum. I've just finished the Bruseum 2 years ago with our boys, the Palladino brothers, and Billy Smith, the Wunderkind up there, and Congress Beer, which we celebrated our 5th anniversary of bringing this thing back. And the community outreach and the community response has been amazing. And you get to drink beer for a good cause because OHA gets a little bit of the revenue thanks to the agreement we've got with Kevin and Rock. So, so that's, that. And I do all kinds of other stuff. I write a weekly column for the Post-Standard and Syracuse.com. I give constant lectures. I give walking tours. I'm still an adjunct professor. So, I'm a busy man. I'm just trying to spread the word, spread the love, the history.
Wild. So much to talk about just from that.
My God, I know. It's lots.
So where are you originally from?
I grew up in the Triple Cities. I actually grew up in Vestal, New York, forever. My dad worked at IBM, which was born there in Endicott. My grandfather worked at IBM. My mom was an English teacher. My other grandfather was a history teacher at Johnson City High School, and I think that's sort of where my love of history came from. Yeah.
So you did your post-grad at SU?
Yeah, I came up here to go to grad school.
Okay, where'd you do your undergrad?
I did my undergrad at Binghamton University.
Okay.
After several years of being on fish tour and living like a general bohemian wild man, playing in rock and roll bands, and I finally decided, got my wife sort of pulled me back to reality, and she's like, you're too smart to be just smoking weed all day and listening to fish. I said, well, that's probably true, but so got my act together and went back to school and figured I could do a lot. I could still do some of those things and actually make a living. So that was good. And then came here, but I grew up a Syracuse fan, so you got to remember, like I grew up. I'm 42. I'm getting old. My kids won't let me forget it. But I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, the glory days for Syracuse sports there. I remember watching Keith Smart hit that dagger, watching McPherson, growing up with those guys, McNabb and Marvin Graves and Marvin Harrison. So when I finally got accepted to grad school at Syracuse in 2006, it was a big deal for me and for the fam. And there's pictures of me when I'm 10 and down in Vestal with just orange geared up. And as I often say, I think I was made for this gig because I'm sort of the de facto historian of Syracuse, even though OHA is a private organization. I've got hypertension and orange hair, so I was made to be the historian for the Salt City.
I didn't know OHA was a private organization.
We are, yeah. Most people don't. A lot of people think I've got some cush government gig, and I can assure you this is not the case. No, we're celebrating actually this year 106. Well, no, it's 2024. Last year was our 160th anniversary as an organization. So really tremendous. And like a lot of historical associations across the country, OHA started as a sort of a small private club for the elites in the community. And that really was the foundation of what now is a amazing collection that is housed in our 65,000 square foot museum over on Montgomery Street. But yeah, we're a private organization, so we really do rely on the largesse of local businesses and partnerships like the one we have with Willow Rock, or some of our great partners, including our good friends at Hubert Brewer and things like that. Like and the Community Foundation. I mean, there's a lot of local organizations that help fund organizations like ours, and we really, really need that. In addition to some government help, but no, OHA is a private 501c3.
Wow, that's wild. As I was like driving around over the past week or past few days thinking about this podcast, and like I said, usually I don't come into any podcast with like, I have an idea of like what I would talk to the person about, but I don't write anything down. This was a little different. I tried to do a little research because I don't want to sound like an idiot.
That's
and just be like, what's a salt potato?
Hence my shirt.
Hence your shirt.
Love it, yeah.
But as I was driving around, I was thinking to myself, what happens when Bob's gone? Like, what happens if Bob moves on? Like, who's going to protect the historical roots of Syracuse?
Well, there's lots of folks doing great work around here. I mean, when I came to Syracuse, one of the first people that I met was, the indefatigable Michael John Haggerty, local legend, impresario, who's doing amazing stuff. And Mike was working at Kitty Hoynes, which is where I spent a lot of time my first couple of years up here. My wife, Katrina, and I would go there on the reg. And Haggerty was one of those guys that sort of, and that was all sort of like pop culture stuff.
Yeah.
But Mike's great. I mean, obviously, our good buddy David Haas at Syracuse History.
Yeah,
David's doing amazing stuff. And David is doing stuff out in the digital realm. That's really wonderful, shining lights on us, like the stuff that you're doing. I mean, and I think one of the things I try to do as a younger person who considers himself to be somewhat hip, to use a word that's probably unhip now, but is try to make history fun and accessible. Like it's not, like the ancient guy that taught it to you in high school where you just had to drone on like Bueller, So, and I think, and there seems to be, and I know you could probably attest to this too, the people that are moving into this community, like people on Facebook comment sections don't really grasp this, but there are lots of people moving into this community, young, and like I've done a lot of projects, whether it was at the Dietz building, for instance, or the Oak Knitting Mill, or I mean, or the new Merrill Sewell stuff. Like the apartments that young professionals are moving into the community, like they're interested in the past of this community. You're living in an old factory, like we're in the Delavan right now. Like, what went on here, right? Like, you had people from all over the world come here to build products that went back all over the world. And this community in particular, per capita, has probably some of the best stories and some of the biggest manufacturing. I think that there's a real interest in that stuff.
Yeah.
And so finding ways to make that accessible, is what, we're trying to do, our team at the OHA. But that's, like I said, like folks like Haggerty, folks like David Haas and Syracuse History, like we're all working towards the same goal. You know what I mean? And I may be more of an academic about it at the end of the day because of the organization that I work for and because of the way, and more of sort of traditional channels. But what's good, I'm not a fan of Ronald Reagan by any stretch of the imagination, but he used to talk about a rising tide lifts all boats. Yeah. And I think right now what we're seeing in this community is there's so much positivity amidst historic negativity because this area has been hit really hard in terms of job loss and population loss. But I've been here now long enough where I really see this inflection point, and particularly downtown. There's a vitality, there's a vigor, right? Yeah. And one of the things as a historian that I think is just amazing is that you've got a real interest in the stories. Like my phone rings off the hook. I can't, if I could clone myself, much like yourself, it's like we got to turn business away in some regard because there's just so much to do and there's so many people interested. I think that's great.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I do think that's good. And being a little connected in like the real estate world and seeing how many people are moving to the area, how little availability of homes that there are in Central New York right now is incredibly eye-opening. Having the food tour business this past summer, we only did maybe a dozen or so by the time we really got it up and running.
Yeah.
But the amount of people that were there was only one group I think I had that was from Syracuse. And like the 12 tours that we gave, the majority of them were people who had either just been transferred here for like kind of a bigger job, or people that like chose Syracuse as their vacation destination in the middle of the summer.
Well, and I mean, like, that's what's funny to me, because this is one of the things I love about my job at OHA is that I give tours to and meet people from every corner of the globe, whether it's because they're international graduate students at Syracuse University or whether it's because they moved here to work for Saab Census or SRC, and they eat up, pun totally intended, I guess, the history of this community. And so, like, when this last summer, I had the great experience of giving a series of walking tours downtown. We did 8 of them. They were all sold out, and literally, I think I had people from 5 continents, various corporations that were there that were interested and wanted to learn more about the community because they had chose to live here. And I think, like, we were the only upstate city that gained population in the 2020 census. There's a lot of great things going on, and again, there's people that want to learn more about the community. And like, I feel like if we can do it with food, we can do it with history, we can do it with the history of food, beer, all of it. Like it's a big win for the whole city.
Yeah. I was there's this book I read years ago called History Makers, and unfortunately, one of the co-authors of it now it's a Christian book because I grew up in church. Unfortunately, one of the co-authors has turned into like a Trump prophet.
It's unfortunate.
Yeah. And but the book that he wrote, I forget, maybe the early 2000s. It was really interesting because it was him and this other pastor, and the one pastor had this like big like soup kettle, like iron soup kettle, that his family had been passed down from like generations to when his grandparents were like slaves in the South.
Wow.
And one of the interesting things about it is they used to obviously use it to cook in, but at night, he said what they used to do, because they weren't allowed to, is they would turn the kettle upside down and like lift it up a little bit, and they would lay on their stomachs on the ground and like kind of with their mouths into the kettle and pray into it, because they weren't allowed to like pray or worship or anything like that. Yeah. And so, and he had this kettle, and the interesting part is these 2 pastors decided for some reason, I forget how the story goes, but they took it on this like national tour, and they would go to like all of these like either significant like sites for like, whatever, the Civil War or like slavery, and then they did this all moving west. And it was just kind of like, it was like sort of like their, like a, I don't know, like a prayer, like spiritual forgiveness tour, essentially, of like trying to like,
atone.
Yeah, exactly. Atone for whatever, all the horrible things.
The terror, the horror.
And one of the interesting things that they said was that they had noticed moving from the East Coast, like from the Northeast down and over to the West Coast, the difference in people's like openness, acceptance, traditions, how like traditions were completely grounded in the North in the East Coast and not so much on the West Coast. And one of the reasons why they were talking, like they mentioned, was just time. Yeah. The East, we had on the East side of the country, we had so much more time of colonialism.
For sure.
Moving west. And I always thought that was really interesting. I've thought about that a lot in terms of food, in terms of like, why is it that so many different things pop up first on the West Coast and in New York City, but the West Coast, and then slowly trickle their way over,
Yeah, that's a fascinating subject matter. I mean, it's sort of reminiscent. We actually were the first, talking about salt potatoes, like in terms of like regional things and foods that spring up. The Pomeroy Foundation, William G. Pomeroy Foundation, who does a lot of the historical markers, we worked with them, and they have one of their sort of lines of that is a Hungry for History marker. And so they want to get these plaques that are laying out the history of these various regional and ethnic foods and how they popped up, which I think is, again, fascinating, because one of the great windows into the past is through food, and that story is exactly that. What I worry about, unfortunately, though, is that was the case, and there are still great regional variations, obviously, but like, since the World War II, that sort of homogenization of American culture, and my wife and I were talking about this as we were driving back from New York City over the holiday, like, basically, like, any town you're in now, for the most part, like the main drag, it all looks the same. It's like everybody's got a Buffalo Wild Wings, everybody's got a
Yeah.
gas. I think and we thought it's like so. The more that we can celebrate and maintain and carry those, especially culinary traditions forward, I think is important because it's like if every place is the same spot, right, and then everyone's just going to eat it in TGI Fridays, then
Right.
What are we talking about? You know?
For sure. Yeah. Coming back from like the Cincinnati area over the holidays, it's a commercial universe. I mean, everything is a chain.
Yeah.
It's a massive chain. And my brother who lives there with his family was saying, if a local place pops up, nobody really cares. If a massive chain pops up, it's like the talk of the town. Everybody is going crazy for it.
Well, I remember, I remember when, and I don't know why, but I remember when the Golden Corral opened here, and
That's right.
I'm laughing my ass off. I'm like, it's like a upscale Ponderosa, which was shit to begin with. People couldn't wait to get in, and then COVID hit and it fucked it up. But I'm just like, one thing I do really find endearing about my time in Syracuse is that there really does seem to be a real love. Mm-hmm. And again, this goes to what you're talking about, the tradition, the roots, right? The diaspora of people from this city is enormous, right? Especially with the population loss of the last 30 years. But so you've got people writing me emails about an article I wrote about salt potatoes from Europe, that they're living in, they're England now, but they grew up in Syria. People in California writing about the salt potatoes and lamenting that they can't get them. And I always laugh and I write them back. I'm like, you can make them yourself. It's just really salty water with little potatoes. So that whole idea there's a lot of love for local here, and obviously you know this. You're living it. You're on the vanguard of it, and that's what gives a community identity, right? The fish fryer. I love the fish fryer. It's right down the street from the museum. If it was open for lunch every day, I would go there every day, right? Like you've got soups or salads, right? And I'm talking about places that are close. 317 right next door, right? These are awesome spots to eat, locally owned, locally sourced, and we've got so many of them, and it's a selling point. Back to the point talking about earlier, when you've got people coming in, they just moved here, right? One of the things I do on the walking tours of downtown is, and I always joke, I'm like, I'm not getting paid by any of these people. This is all because I love them. Is like, oh yeah, well that's the Courier Building, and Daniel Webster gave this speech about treason and the Fugitive Slave Act, but it's also the home to our great local coffee roaster, Recess, or this is Fish Fryer. You're going to get the best fresh seafood you can possibly get, and so that's part of selling the Syracuse, right? That's part of acclimating people to the community. Is letting them know what happened here, and this is a significant building, or this is, or as I often joke, that's a very significant parking lot because there used to be a great building there. But at the same time, while you're here, hit the spot. And I the feedback that you get from people, A, they love it, and B, a lot of them will then come back to me and be like, thanks for the rec, right? Thanks for pointing it out, because I might not have, heard about it sooner or whatever. And again, it's just one big happy family as far as I'm concerned, and that stuff. Being positive about what's going on, looking out for each other, selling for everybody, right? And to quote the great Glengarry Glen Ross, always be closing, right? Always be closing.
I think I may have lost part of my maybe my Syracuse card, my membership card, because as much as I love Syracuse, I also am more of a fan of other areas' food scenes. Sure. Syracuse, I think hopefully is changing. There's nobody's opened up, which is great. We lost a couple of greats.
We
did.
We did.
But nobody's opened up, and Zach and Rob, and I forget her name. I'm blanking now. I feel so terrible for forgetting her name. Her opened up the Old Mission.
Sarah Pellegrini.
Sarah, yes.
Yeah. We're hoping to do a little installation there based on the obviously tremendous history of that building as the center of the Underground Railroad.
So when I heard that, I asked, and it took me a while to finally be able to do it, but Rob took me down in the basement and let me see and take me back there, and
tight squeeze.
Yeah. When I heard about it, I was just like, I just want to go there. I'm a big believer in there's something in the walls.
Oh yeah.
If I could get into a space like that and just kind of sit there and absorb it and meditate or whatever the hell.
Oh, brother, that's you can feel the ghosts. You feel the history.
Yeah, it's crazy.
There's nothing like it.
Yeah. So for everybody who doesn't know what we're talking about, so underneath the old Mission restaurant, which I don't know, and the Mission was there for years,
long time.
Yeah. But underneath the old Mission restaurant, Well, first of all, the building's a church. For those of you listening who aren't from Syracuse, it's an old church. It was this restaurant called The Mission for like 20 or 30 years. It closed during COVID and became Luna Loca for like a year, and then it closed, and then now it's going to be this other restaurant. But in the basement of the restaurant, correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, my extent of it is that it was used as part of the Underground Railroad system in Syracuse.
Yeah, so the church was built by the Wesleyan Methodists, who were sort of a radical sect of the Methodist Church who believed in radical things like racial and gender equality, which was radical in the 1840s. And they built a church that was a multiracial congregation, and they put it up in 1845, which is really the midpoint of the Underground Railroad ascension in Syracuse. And Syracuse was one of the major centers of Underground Railroad activity anywhere in the Northeast. In fact, it was known as the Grand Central Depot of the Underground Railroad. And Jermaine Logan, who was a bishop in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, was the station master here, sort of Syracuse's counterpart to Frederick Douglass in Rochester. But members of that church were active on the railroad, either in housing freedom seekers or helping to fund freedom seekers. And there is this old sort of basement that was carved out. And Syracuse, as I often say, was a swamp until they built the Erie Canal in 1820. So the water table here is really high. And that clay, if you've ever tried to garden in this area, you know it's not the best. It's really clay. But so that soil lent itself to sort of carving out. And then in the 90s, they were doing excavations as part of the mission's expansion. And what they found down there were a series of actual carvings, like basically, and Garth Johnson, my good buddy, who's the curator over at the Everson, even sometimes looks to think of them as ceramic because it is like this clay that was formed into the walls of this area. Now, we can't say with any definitive proof that they were made by freedom seekers before 1860 when the Civil War basically begins. But there was some archaeological work done by some professors at Syracuse University that says they were there before 1880 at least. So we actually have some of these on display at the OHA that you can see. And then we were, like I said earlier, we're talking about, I think they're going to call it the Noble Cellar, I think is the name, which I love, is to actually either make a model casting of one of the faces with a little bit of an interpretive panel there above the bar so that people really understand the power of the space that they're in, to your point earlier, to know. And beyond the Underground Railroad activity, that was the site in 1864, in October of 1864, just a few weeks before the most consequential presidential election in this country's history until the one I think we're about to have in November, when the fate of 4 million enslaved people in America were on the ballot. And it wasn't sure if Lincoln was going to beat McClellan. And there is a gathering in that church called the National Colored Men's Convention. And it's the first time that this group meets in 9 years. It is the largest, most impressive gathering of African-American leaders in American history up to that point. Wow. President of the convention is named Frederick Douglass, and then they will actually meet. About 170 delegates from 17 states meet there. They have public meetings in the Whiting Opera House, which is down on Clinton Square where the atrium is now. And so this is where they create the National Equal Rights League, which becomes the preeminent civil rights organization until the NAACP. So this happens in that building, in this community. So, so any chance this is where we get people coming in for the wine bar, right? Yeah. And then they see the face and they see the history, and it just adds another layer of depth to the experience.
Yeah. It's wild to think Syracuse and the significance it played so long ago. I mean, even going further back, right, into just like salt production and distribution all across the country and the world. But I mean, even things like that, to think that there was such a significant thing happening in this city as, trying to move, these enslaved people up to Canada, I'm assuming, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And, and then the significant change, the drastic changes over time.
Yeah, and I think that, the Syracuse's central location is critical to that. I mean, it's one of the reasons, we're really the hub of a transportation network, whether it's the railroads, whether it's the interstate system, as we're all going to now live through 10 years of the construction of 81 again. But even before that, right? I mean, you go all the way back to the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. We're in the capital of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy here at Onondaga. So this community long before it was colonized even, right, is a center of economics. It's a center of social and political activity. It's a place where people come together. And a lot of that stuff is over food. But that transportation network allowed Syracuse to really reach out nationally, whether, you know, and the Underground Railroad is a great example of its geography making it a place where freedom seekers were able to get to Lake Ontario very quickly because you had the Erie Canal running right through the heart of the city, and you had the Oswego Canal running right up to Lake Ontario. And those same canals then transported salt, which, you know, the vast majority of the salt in the United States until the 1860s came from 600 acres around Onondaga Lake. And it's amazing. I mean, you got your Syracuse Salt Company hat on.
Yeah.
You know, they are doing amazing work, and that salt is bomb. It's fantastic, especially for finishing salt. So they're sort of bringing it back. I mean, it's been 100 years since the salt industry, died in this community. So the fact that they're over there doing their thing, and I mean, and it's getting traction, I know, with some big chefs. So, but yeah, the outstripped sort of influence of this community, and it's not just salt potatoes, but just in everything that they made here, really is one of the things that, as a transplant, I've grown to be. I'm continually amazed by it, right? And at one point, and this people's heads explode sometimes when I say this, Syracuse was one of the 25 largest cities in the country at the turn of the 20th century.
It's wild.
It is wild. I mean, we're like 187th now, but so yeah. I mean, this is a community, and as usual, it's a place like America. It's a microcosm. We have people from everywhere, which is why I mean, you can get food from. Every part of the globe in this city.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, is it New York, Chicago? No, of course not. But it is, considering what most people I think about the city from maybe outside. I think the reality is drastically different and much better, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's still, my sister who's significantly older than I am, even though she's never going to listen to this, so that joke's not going to hit.
Great family support.
Yeah. No, my sister is 10 years older than I am, who lived here for maybe 6 months at one point in her life. She was home, I think, 2 Christmases ago or 2 Thanksgivings ago, and I took her to Oh My Darling.
Great spot.
And walking in there, she was like, "This isn't Syracuse. We're not in Syracuse. This isn't Syracuse." It's like, yeah, it's been here for a while.
Yeah.
It really is. Syracuse, the things that give me a lot of hope right now in our food industry is places like Birria Queso Tacos. She's like illegally doing it out of her kitchen, and then the test kitchen now she's got to be opening up her own spot.
That's spectacular,
and they're the best.
They're
tacos.
phenomenal.
Yeah,
they're ridiculously good. Well, and then Salt City Market, right? Like, or Habib's. I mean, like there's so much of that story. Here and for me, it's a continuation of that. I mean, it's a cliche, but the Germans and the Irish did it in the 1850s, right? And now people from various locales are doing it again, and we get to be the beneficiaries of their hard work and their labor. And now I want birria tacos, and like they're fucking fantastic.
Yeah, they're great.
And I'm also thinking about that fantastic elevator in Oh My Darling down in Fritz, down in the Fitz there. Amazing local history and a great building.
Yeah,
great stuff.
All right, so what can you tell me as I let you take your drink? This is the only downside about doing the podcast is I always drink twice as much as the guest.
No downside.
All right, so what can you tell me about Syracuse style pizza?
Oh God, can I tell you? I mean, I would say that has to be is that the Twin Trees pizza? I would imagine. I mean, that's so.
Yeah, this is my gotcha journalism.
I mean, I think that's it. I mean, it's a little. I mean, I love pizza. I'm a bit of a pizziolo myself. Okay. I would use that term. Yeah. The wife and kids got me an uni a couple years ago, and I've been fucking around with dough for a minute now. So I'm damn good. I'm almost. I'm not a pizza regional, but I'm damn good. But Syracuse pizza is Twin Trees, and I think I had Twin Trees for the first time when I moved here in like 2007. Mm-hmm. My wife's old boss at ESF grew up on the north side, and he just. Twin Trees was it.
Yeah.
And so we went to Twin Trees, and I got to say, I loved it. I mean, it was good. It was a little thicker. They cut it funny. Yeah. Like Bocce. I lived in Buffalo for a while, and Bocce in Buffalo also cuts it like that.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's like a particular thing from like where you were from in Italy or what, if that is, if it's like Sicilian or what. But anyway,
I don't think that has anything to do with Italy.
They just cut it that way. I don't know. Sometimes I'll cut my pizza like that at home, but it's good. It's like it's doughy and it's cheesy. It's kind of greasy.
Yeah.
Not as greasy as Varsity, which is too
Right.
greasy for me. I mean, I might get thrown vegetables at me on the street or whatever. But I don't know. It's like it's not Sicilian, but it's not
Right.
but it's not New York. I don't know. For my money, best pizza in this community that isn't a pizza regionale, because that's my favorite.
Yeah.
Is Mario and Salvo's, and
Yeah, for sure.
and we crush Mario and Salvo's at my house at least once a week. I would eat it every day if I could.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the thing about pizza in general. And I think especially in Syracuse, people want to say like, who has the best? And for me, it's like, all right, I've decided I want pizza. Now, what style of pizza? Like,
Right.
Do I want a Detroit? Do I want Neapolitan? Or do I have to go see if Via Napoli's open? If it's not
That's
cold.
good shit too.
Right. Do I want Mario and Salvo's? Do I want a Syracuse cut? Like, it's not just like I want pizza, that will do. It's like I want pizza, what style? Yeah, it's Shuffles Pizza. It was a West Side pizzeria, which was like the start of Twin Trees, essentially. Like,
Oh, okay.
Shuffles existed, and then Twin Trees. I believe the story is Twin Trees like spun out of that. Shuffles is like basically the same thickness, the same cut. Yeah, it's a little breadier.
Right.
It's not a Sicilian where it's really thick and bready, but it's also not a New York style where it's like thin. It's cut in strips, which is odd for
Pizza
sure.
strips.
I've never seen. There's a chain in. I think they're all over like the Midwest and the South, but it's called Donato's, and it's like really thin, really really thin, not like cracker thin, but really thin.
like that.
And then it's just covered from edge to edge with pepperoni.
Okay.
And but theirs is cut in strips, similar to Twin Trees. But anyway, so that's that. And then, but that's really the extent of a Syracuse style pizza today. It's that thickness of a crust that's cut in strips.
It's the strips. Pizza strips.
Shuffles pizza from back in the day was.
When are we talking? Back in the day, 60s? Because Twin Tree's been around a long time.
Yeah, I think it was around that time.
Okay.
Like my dad, I think grew up eating Shuffles, and he grew up. We lived too in Westvale.
I love the name.
Yeah, and there was something different about his cheese. I think he used like Lucatelli or something. He used a different style of cheese on it than just mozzarella. The rumor on the street is that Charlie Roman at Daniela's is the only person in existence with the Shuffles recipe.
Does he make it?
I've been told that he does make it at the restaurant, but it's not on their menu.
You got to ask for it. You got to know the guy.
I was going to go in there and try it. Syracuse.com covered a story on it maybe like 15 years ago.
Oh, Charlie's got to get up there and do it again, dude.
Yeah. Interviewed with like the family of Shuffles, the original owner and stuff.
See, now this is what I love this. Now I'm going to go dig on Shuffles, and I think maybe I'll have to write a column on it at some point. You've got me thinking about pizza, which is always on my mind.
It'll be fun. We should do like a video series where we take a different food item from Syracuse and do like the history of it and like the modern.
I'm all about that.
That'd be cool.
That would be great. I think that's a great idea. There's a spot in you asked me where I grew up at the beginning. There's a spot in Johnson City called Brosetti's.
Okay.
And Brosetti's does little it's like cafeteria tray size pizza.
Okay.
But it's square and they cut it, and it's also it's like you're talking about the difference. It's like I don't know if it's American, but it's not mozzarella. And the bread, the crust has like a little sweetness to it. I've never had pizza like it anywhere in the world. Anywhere in the world. Next time you're passing through, go hit up Brosetti's and snag it. It's like, and get a white garlic and get a plain cheese.
Is it Brosetti's with a Z?
Brosetti's with double Z. And they had the best jingle. When growing up, if you grew up in Binghamton and you hear the 7979960, call Brosetti's for pizza to go. I still sing it constantly. I don't think so. It's a legendary. So get it. You'll love it.
I'll have to check it out. Have you ever had Oskanitz in Utica?
No, I need to go. People keep telling me to go to Utica to eat.
It's good. It's the second oldest pizzeria in the country.
Yeah, Is it like New Haven style?
No, it's
pizza?
No, it's a round pie. It's not thick, but it's a little thick, and it's an upside down pie. So it's like sliced mozzarella down first.
Okay.
Sauce on top. They put like a pecorino or something on top. And it's not bad. It's not something that, like, if it's a Friday night or a Sunday and I'm watching football, I don't want to eat an Oskanitz pizza. But it's really great just to go in there just for the fact that it's the second oldest pizzeria in the country.
Well, see, that's why I have to go there. I have to go to places like this.
Yeah, it's really good. Making pizza it's
You're doing it. I see you on
Yeah.
Facebook. You're doing the
Yeah,
Detroit
man.
style. It looks
Yeah.
damn good.
Yeah, thanks. I got into pizza. That was like one of my COVID things. We got chickens. Mm-hmm. I got into pizza. I got into sourdough.
Oh, hell
we
yeah.
live on the north side, so I had chickens in the backyard in the north side.
That's so old timey. That's great.
and so that was all fun, and I was really getting into pizza, and then I wanted to start to get back, and it's so expensive to go out to eat nowadays.
I know it's ridiculous,
and so
especially if you have kids.
oh yeah. I mean, yeah, our son eats, he's at the point, he's 14 months yesterday. So he's at the point where now, like, he eats what we eat, but obviously not the same
Much
amount.
less.
Although he can put food down. The kid is,
I would expect nothing less.
yeah, he is going to be, hopefully. My wife made the comment, we were talking about like, athletics as he gets older. And she made the comment, well, if he's anything like us, he's probably not going to be very athletic. And, although I did play football in high school. Anyways, having said that, I was like, and it was completely off topic, but I was just thinking to myself, yeah, but I think we could like mold him into, if we wanted him to be like a football player, we could be like,
sure.
You're going,
Yeah, you could go all Earl Woods on him and just make him do whatever you want.
yeah.
Don't do that. But
No,
yeah.
we won't do that. Yeah. I forget how we got on the topic.
Pizza.
From pizza.
Pizza will
to
take
that.
you anywhere.
Oh, so I wanted to get into pizza again today. It's too expensive. It's like we got, I won't name the place, but we got wings and a large 2-topping pizza. It was $60.
That's outrageous.
So I was like, I'm going to make it at home. We have a small kitchen. I know if I started putting flour on the countertop and stretching the dough, she'd shoot me. So I was like, Detroit style. It's contained. I don't have to do it. Pretty much goes from like the mix, when you mix your dough, to the fridge and then to your pan and you're done. It's not a big mess.
I've never tried Detroit style. I'm gonna have to.
It's actually incredibly easy.
Okay.
I've only done it like a handful of times now, but from what I've learned, the magic happens in how long you let it proof in the pan.
Yeah. What are you finding to be the magic number?
All day long.
All day long.
All day long.
Are we talking out of the fridge?
Yeah. So I do
Room temperature proof.
Yeah. Okay. I mix it. I do a 2-hour slap and fold.
Yeah.
Into the fridge for 2 days. And then the morning of, when I leave the house at 7, it goes into the pan with oil. And then I cover it in saran wrap. When I come home at the end of the day, it has risen all the way to the top of the pan and filled out perfectly. And then I par bake it. And
Okay.
that locks it all in.
How long?
Like 4 to 6 minutes,
Okay.
depending.
All right.
The challenge is with Detroit style, if you add all your toppings on at first and bake it raw, the dough collapses under the weight.
Oh God.
of the
I imagine it
toppings.
would pool and be a mess.
And so then you wind up getting like it just shrinks down. So if you put some oil on the top, like a healthy amount of oil, and then par bake it and then pull it out and then do the rest. So I par bake it with a little bit of cheese and a little bit of oil and then pull it out and then add everything else. And it's great.
I'm going to a pizza regional as soon as I leave this podcast.
I went to OIP.
This is outrageous.
On my way here.
Drinking beer and not eating pizza. I'm having DTs.
All right. So, looking at doing my history, obviously salt potatoes. I mean, salt potatoes, the history of that is essentially the salt workers were boiling potatoes for lunch, right?
Yeah, I mean, the history of it is poor Irish salt boilers. And what I love about this story, though, is that I would like to think that I actually found the guy that invented them. We did this thing for the Pomeroy Foundation and dug into the history, and with the magic of Google search, you can sort of find and pinpoint like the first time phrase was used. Found salt potato, and then went and dug in the archives of the UHA, which are amazing. Many thanks to the late great Dick and Carolyn Wright for all their fastidious work in the 50s and 60s. I've been amazed what you'll find, and sure enough, found this little newspaper clipping of the Keefe brothers who had a tavern on Wolf Street, and the building is still there. It's actually Tradition Builders or something. It's right next. There's a strip club right next to the building, which only comes into the story because when we did the Hungry for History marker, and I told the Pomeroy Foundation that we've got it. I found the Keefe brothers, and they opened a saloon in the 1880s, and I found their father, and his name was Arthur, and he came over from Ireland in 1839, and I found him in the 1840 census, and he's a salt boiler, and I'm like freaking out because I'm a nerd and I love this stuff. And I so we could put it like in the store where they serve the sort of salt potatoes, and you could still. And I said, But caveat, there's a gentleman's club right next door. And Darren Palmer, who's fantastic, she's like, no, I don't think that's going to work. I said, all right. So instead we put it in front of the Salt Museum, which is probably a better frame. But yeah, so we found, and basically it's like, look, they were poor. They had potatoes. And the reason salt potatoes are so damn good is you people making them with these giant potatoes, it doesn't work. You got to get the little nubbers, like the ones that weren't good enough, right? You take them, you throw them in all day. And the salinity, as our friends at the Syracuse Salt Company could tell you, the salinity of Syracuse salt is, I think, higher than the actual ocean, right? It's crazy salty. So these things just threw them in, pull them out, they're eating them, they threw butter all over them, and they're just drinking them.
Yeah.
And so the Keefe brothers, James and Arthur, right, they realized growing up in a house of a salt boiler, like, people eat these shits. The margins are crazy good, right?
Yeah.
Potatoes are cheap. And so in the 1880s, they're getting a little older. They'd worked in the salt industry, after they got out of school, and they opened this tavern on Wolf Street. And the only thing they serve there is, it's next to their grocery store, is beer and salt potatoes.
Really?
Which someone needs to do that in Syracuse. Listen up, folks. So beer and salt potatoes. And they operate it for several decades, and it's a spot. And from that spot on Wolf Street, the salt potato grows out the diaspora. It goes up the north side to Hinterwaddles, who are the Germans up there at the Clam Bar right up the road, and they really then make the Grove, as it was known, which I think just closed a few years ago.
Yeah.
But that's the famous white bag.
That's wild.
Which is there. So like that, and again, so like every time you eat a salt potato, like there's the history of the immigrants and the ingenuity, of this, what is really a very basic thing. But my God, they're delicious. And they make the best fucking home fries in the world if you don't eat them all at the barbecue.
Right.
Whoa!
Yeah. That reminds me of, I think it was one of the first pizzerias in New York City. They used to, the factory workers used to grab it on their way into the factory in the morning, wrapped in a brown paper bag with string, and then put it on the heater or boiler or whatever, and warm it back up. That's wild.
We've got a great old radiator in the collection at the OHA. They used to have the bread warmers in the radiators for the apartments in the city.
Oh, really?
Oh, it's spectacular. Yeah. There are probably still some. I'm sure David Haas has put one of them on Syracuse history somewhere.
Huh. We should get Willow Rock to do a salt potato in Congress only. Like, that's the only beer that they serve one night.
That would be great. We served salt potatoes when we had the salt potato party there when we did the Pomeroy marker.
Yeah.
And so we had salt potatoes, and they do go really well with brunch.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good. Yeah, I'll have to text Kevin and Rockney after just Rockney. Yeah, that's pretty. So that's
they're the best.
Yeah. So when did the salt industry cease to exist in Syracuse?
It was basically done by 1921.
Okay.
Right, and in the span of the 100 years, I mean, there really is no, and I say this all the time. There is no Erie Canal. There is no, Syracuse without salt. Geddes, James Geddes, who is the man who surveys the canal route twice in 1808 and 1810. Josh Foreman, who maybe is rightly called Mr. Syracuse. These guys are aware of the economic potentialities of the salt market here, and is one of the things that drives them to call for the legislation that creates the canal. Somewhere in the area of 40% of the original costs were actually helped to be paid with tax on Onondaga salt, and then that helps grow the entire economy around that. And then we think about salt as like a seasoning, right? But before refrigeration, you needed salt. It was absolutely essential to life. Transporting, storing food, you needed salt, and so you needed a lot of it. And so you had when the Haudenosaunee were here before the white people came in and colonized the place, they didn't really hang out much around where we are in Syracuse because it was essentially a marsh and there was salt everywhere. So when they showed Lemoyne the salt in 1654, he's like, thinking money, money, money. But it isn't really for another 150 years. But those first settlers come, Geddes is one of them, with basically like copper kettles, and they boil salt around the lake, and that grows into an industry that dominates the national market, basically for 100 years, from like the 1820s right up to 1920, 1921. And in the meantime, what the money and the investment that grows up around the salt industry creates all the other wealth that's here. So that white gold is the foundation of everything from, Kraus-Heinz Electrical or the Franklin Automobile or Syracuse University, is all in part funded because of the money made in the salt industry. I mean, George Comstock made a bunch of money in the salt business. And he's, of course, the guy that gives the land to Syracuse University, and Comstock Street is, of course, named after him. So salt is central to the central city.
That's wild. That's crazy. So, And what year was Syracuse founded?
As a village in 1825.
1825. Okay.
And incorporated as a city in 1847.
Yeah, it's a wonder that no one prior to the Syracuse Salt Company has tried to do anything with that.
It is, and you wonder. I mean, I wonder why. And I've never actually asked David this, but what the inspiration for, like, what got him back into doing it?
Yeah.
Especially because, I mean, we love his product. We partnered with them to do, we've got this great program that OHA runs with Syracuse Salt Company and the Syracuse City School District, bringing fourth graders to the Salt Company Works, where they can sort of see the process, and then we take them to the Salt Museum, and they learn about the industry, they learn about the history, and then they actually make their own evaporative salt in their classroom. So
that's cool.
Which is cool. So you're bringing, again, history and food and all together. But I don't know why. It's one of those things where salt is an afterthought.
Right, yeah.
Part of it, I think, maybe too, it is that with the rise of the foodie scene, like, I mean, we're both foodie. Like, the quality product matters, and, like, you could get the sea salt from the coasts of, Greece or Italy, which is where we sort of take our name from, Syracuse. But here in the States, it's a throwback, it's an artisanal product, and it's really good. So I don't know, I think that might have sort of played a part in it. There was a market for it because they've been around now. I mean, what, 6-7 years? I feel like.
Yeah, I think so.
And it just seems to get bigger and bigger and bigger. But
Yeah.
I'm glad they did, because, like I said, not only is it a great product to use, but it's a great branding thing for the city. And as it continues to sort of grow and get picked up by actual chefs and restaurants, I think it's one of these things that, I mean, we're not going to back to 600 acres and 5 million bushels a year like they were in the 1860s. But any little bit helps.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's freaking delicious.
Yeah, it's really great salt. I know they do a lot outside of Syracuse. Definitely need to get more restaurants aware in Syracuse of Syracuse salt and using it.
Yes.
So for time's sake, I'm going to skip talking about Congress because we already touched on it.
We touched it.
But
go buy it. Drink for a good cause.
Yeah. What can you tell me about Mary Elizabeth Evans Sharp?
Mary Elizabeth Evans Sharp, my gosh, she was one of Greg Tripoli's favorite people. So Mary Elizabeth is one of the great female entrepreneurs of the 20th century, really of all time. She, in the community, she starts making her own chocolates in her home. And from this humble beginning, she starts selling them. Originally, she's selling them out of a little case made by the great Gustav Stickley, in fact, in the old university building over on Washington or Warren. My geography's failing me. And so she starts, and it becomes a thing, and people are like, my God, this young girl is making these amazing chocolates. And from this thing, I mean, it's sort of like it's a tale you'd hear today, like a TikTok sensation, all of a sudden then builds this into this juggernaut of a company. And then during World War I, she's making chocolates for the war effort, and eventually marries a wealthy industrialist out of Providence, and that's where a lot of the family papers are. But she builds a fortune of millions of dollars, and from this very small, like I said, as a teenager making chocolates in her house. I was just actually telling that story to my daughter, Julia, who's 11, who loves to bake and loves to do that stuff. So I was telling her about Mary Elizabeth. And then a couple years ago, before the pandemic started, we actually sort of resurrected her donut recipe, which was apparently very popular as well.
Really?
So we have the cruller recipe.
Yeah.
And we worked with Polly at Glazing and Fuse, and they put together this, and it was very, very good. And then COVID hit, and it all sort of went sideways. But she was a gifted confectionery, a gifted marketer, and just a tremendous entrepreneur. Again, all right here in Syracuse. It is. It's an incredible story.
Yeah, that'd be really cool to see, like, some sort of a pop up. I mean, of somebody who just like focused in on those foods that were made famous, from here in Syracuse, or from people, like stuff like that.
For a while, actually, again, there was a chocolate shop in Manlius.
Oh, it's
a chocolatier.
One, right?
Yeah. But when I got on board at OHA back in 2017, they were making several varieties of Mary Elizabeth's chocolates, because we have the recipe. The family left all the stuff to the OHA.
Wow.
And they were making them. I think it then, and then again, COVID hit, and I don't think that the chocolate shop
Didn't last,
made
I don't
it.
think,
So
yeah.
like now, we've got, I love the place in Army Square,
Yeah.
Sweet and Chocolate. That place is amazing. And I think maybe we thought about approaching them to sort of bring a
Yeah.
couple of these flavors back. But it's fun because it's like, you also see when you like look back at like old menus or you look back at old cookbooks, like the changes in taste and like
Yeah.
what people were into, like the flavor combinations. Some of them are tremendous, and I had a few of the candies are great, but some of them are like,
I love this part of her story that during the war effort with rationing, that instead of like just being terrified that chocolate was going to be one of those things, instead she came up with this list of recipes for popular, meals, whatever they were, dishes. And the recipes were all using non-rationed alternatives.
yeah, again, just showing her ingenuity, right, and her ability to break things down, and the way her mind worked to be so intelligent and to be able to first and then make the recipes so that they were accessible and to disseminate them and to be thinking that far ahead. I mean, and that is vital to the war effort in terms of keeping support for what was really sort of an unpopular war. This is the First World War, because people didn't really know why they were fighting it, and so it was a way to get some home support as well. So she played an integral role, in that effort.
Yeah.
And we had an Army base right here at the fairgrounds, right? So I mean, she was dealing
that's right.
firsthand with doughboys who came here to train. When Wilson asked for the declaration of war in April of 1917, as soon as Congress gives them the declaration, they immediately have to start to build an army because the United States doesn't have an army. It's not like we've got today.
Yeah.
And so one of the 32 bases that they actually build is at the fairgrounds, and the Army comes in and takes it over and turns it into Syracuse Army base, and they train over 300,000 GIs.
That's wild.
It's nuts.
Yeah.
And they still had the fair the whole time.
Really?
Crazy.
That's wild. I was out at the Cavalry Club,
Yeah.
and they've got kind of a cool little setup out there showing some of the history from.
When they moved out of the armory downtown.
Yeah, it's wild.
Great golf course. I can't afford to play it, but
I don't know if you know. I can't. But I don't know if you know Eamon Lee at all.
I don't.
Eamon Lee is, I've said this a few times now. If there is a Mount Rushmore of Syracuse chefs, Eamon is definitely one of the four.
Why do I know his name?
Eamon's been.
Where's he at?
Right now he's out there, but he's been everywhere. Not everywhere, like he's jumped around, but he was with Maine's for I think a bulk of his career. He was at the what's the big on the corner of Townsend, the big private club.
Oh, Century Club.
Yeah, he was there for a while.
Yeah.
He's back in the day. He was with Max at Lemongrass.
Oh, good stuff. God, I love that place.
Firecracker Thai Kitchen.
Don't know that joint.
It's in the Salt City Market. And Sarah is the owner of it.
Okay.
Her first kitchen job ever was Bistro Elephant and Lemongrass, that the old space they shared
I
the
remember
kitchen.
that.
She worked next to Eamon Lee and Jared from St. Urban. That was her first ever kitchen job, was working next to those two.
That I'm depressed.
Yeah.
That he left. Like my wife and I live on Houston, right in Westcott.
Yeah.
And that was one of those things. Like that was an out of body experience because you go in and the meal is next level, major urban center food, and then you walk out and you're on Westcott Street.
Right.
You're like, what the hell just happened?
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's sad. I hope he does well.
Yeah, I'm sure he'll do fine back in the city, and I think it's I mean, I don't know Jared. The first time that we ever ate there, my wife and I, and he really we ordered. This is back before COVID, so back then you could go in there and get like the 3-course tasting menu for like $30, which is stupid, and that you could go in there and get that level of a meal for so cheap.
A steal.
And I think they had sent out like 2 or 3 additional courses, and one of the things that this is aside from everything else that we experienced that night, one of the things that I really liked was like, as I was like walking to the front, he like had perfectly timed it. He met me right at the host station.
Nice.
He was like, "How was everything?" And I apologized to him, and I said, "I'm so sorry that you just had to make that for me, because I know that was a wonderful, once in a life sort of experience, but I have no idea what you just did."
It's I met Derek Trucks in that restaurant. I'll never forget the great Derek Trucks. In addition, it was like this meal couldn't be any better.
Yeah.
The 7-course. It was Tuscany was the tasting that month, and then Derek Trucks was there because they were playing in Lafayette, and it was just like I couldn't.
That's wild.
I'm retiring from eating now. I can't get any better.
That's awesome. Well, Bob, thank you so much for coming down. And
Thank
talking.
you. This was
Appreciate it.
fantastic.
Yeah. So tell everybody how they can find out more information about the OHA, how they can show support, get involved.
Thank you. Well, you can follow us, obviously, on your sundry social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, I think maybe even TikTok at this point, cnyhistory.org on the good old-fashioned internet. Please, as I said, we would love for you to become a member. It's an absolute bargain. You can do that. You can find us at any one of the 5 museums, whether that's the Scandinavian Great Law Peace Center. You've got the Veterans Memorial Museum in the Old War Memorial there. We've got the Bruseum at Heritage Hill. Please go there. Check that out. Regional Aviation History Museum, and then our good old spot, 321 Montgomery Street downtown. I personally have never met a microphone or a TV camera I didn't like, so you'll see my mug all over. Read my stuff, and Syracuse.com, Post-Standard. I've got a column that runs every Sunday. My colleagues will contribute to CNY Business Journal, CNY Good Life Magazine. We are also really excited. We've got a Smithsonian traveling exhibit that we were selected to host at the Scandinavian Great Law Peace Center on the history of voting and democracy, which we're going to actually put up in the spring of 2025. So we've got a long way to build up for that. So that's really exciting for the community as well. And we're just always out. You'll see us. You'll see me out on the street. You'll see us out any one of the buildings. We do a lot of branding with restaurants. So a lot of our pictures. So we're all over. But please do. We really welcome the support, and I'm really grateful for you having me on. Thanks, man.
Thank you.